I used to think I knew what love looked like, the small, steady things that built a life without fireworks. The way he folded his socks the same way every Sunday, the coffee he left on the counter for me because I always slept late, the soft sound of his breath against the back of my neck when we fell asleep together. I called him Ethan. He called me his Amanda. We lived in a 2-room apartment above a bakery that never let the ovens cool, and the smell of sugar and burnt crust seeped into our clothes and became part of the furniture of our days. That was before the crack. Before the discovery that rearranged my bones and made me a stranger to myself. When I found the first message, it was a fluke. An unattended phone on the cafe table, a name blinking on the screen, Lily. The message thread loaded like a trapdoor. I told myself it was nothing. A stupid flirt, a meaningless comfort, an ephemeral buzz in the hollow of his day. But the language was intimate and precise in the way infidelity always is. Little proof punctures. Can we meet after? I miss you, followed by picture attachments I did not need to see. By the time I left that cafe, the world had the smell of metal to it. My throat tasted like pennies. I texted him, "Who is Lily?" and watched the blue bubble appear and reappear, and then, hours later, "It's nothing, Amanda." Don't be crazy. He did not even lie well. He lied like someone who expected me to nod and accept the performance. I wanted to explode. I wanted to scream, to pull him apart and find the exact seam where he had stitched a new life into ours. I wanted him to feel the same small, keen panic that had hollowed me. Instead, I folded the betrayal inside me like paper, sharp and deliberate, and I walked. People romanticize revenge as a sudden, righteous flare. Poetic, pyrotechnic. That is not how it worked for me. Revenge took patience. Revenge, I decided, would be an architecture built of tiny, calculated things that would make him pay not with blood, because I didn't want to become a headline, but with the slow, precise erosion of everything he treasured. His self-image, his career, the social fabric of his life. I wanted him to wake each morning to a landscape I had remade, to recognize the emptiness I felt and find it reflected tenfold in himself. I began with observation. For weeks I watched him with the clinical attention of someone cataloging a specimen. I learned the cadence of his days, the routes he took to work, the friends he called on certain nights, the bar where he liked to breathe after a hard day. I watched how he framed his guilt. He wore it like a cheap cologne. It was there, but he thought it masked everything else. I watched Lily too, not because I wanted to hurt her, though hurt was a tool, but because she was part of the mechanism that kept him spinning. She turned out to be younger, luminous in a careless way that made men drop their guard. She was also not stupid. She knew she was the distraction, the wedge, the secret. She smiled too wide and wore too much lipstick. The first phase was containment. Make sure he could not control the narrative. He had lied to me once. I would not let him rewrite the moment. I took screenshots of messages, saved email timestamps, backed up photos. Late at night I sat cross-legged on the floor with his laptop open, combing through cookies and cloud backups, learning the small languages of his digital life. I printed things I had no intention of showing anyone. I wrote the chronology, the who, what, when, and I made a timeline that could be weaponized. I kept it hidden beneath a loose floorboard behind the bookcase, the same bookcase where he kept his jazz records. He never looked there. But hoarding evidence is only private vindication. Revenge needs an outward force. It needs to be visible, like a carefully placed bruise. I started by undermining the version of Ethan that the world liked. He was, to everyone, a dependable man, polite to neighbors, a regular at the gym, someone who donated to the little charities at the office. Men like him build a small fortress of respectability and live inside it, believing that respectability is armor. I would crawl into the mortar of that fortress and erode it brick by brick. At first, the attacks were small acts of misdirection. I changed his voicemail greeting to something that made him sound unwell, slightly slurred, a whispery fatigue that suggested insomnia and drinking. No one called him on it. Then I reserved a seat at his favorite restaurant under my own name and paid with cash, leaving a note asking the manager to tell Ethan I'd left. People love small moral failures when they come packaged as offhand gossip. Ethan didn't stand when the barista dropped the plate, or, I saw Ethan flirting with a woman at the bus stop. I learned to plant such seeds. Seeds take root. They sprout. But rumors only grow if someone waters them. For that I needed a partner. Someone who understood the texture of small social poison. I chose Hannah. Hannah had been a friend of ours since college, bright and verbose and jealous in the way people are when they have watched someone succeed. She had a thing for Ethan once, The kind of crush that never quite matured into anything but bitter support. When I told her, eyes steady, that Ethan had been unfaithful, she blinked and then smiled a small predatory smile. She wanted to be in on the breaking. I used her. Hannah became my visible hand, a woman who would casually mention Ethan's late nights at the office, who would ask innocuous questions at parties. Is Amanda okay? She seems quieter lately. And let the question hang like a skunk's tail. She posted those ambiguous Instagram stories that begged interpretation. Nothing direct but enough to suggest turmoil. People don't need answers. They need breadcrumbs. Ethan noticed. He started to space out, to bite at his lip in front of me when Hannah came by. He called me more often, his voice lined with an accusation that he could not hide. Why are you doing this? He asked one night. I looked at him across the sink, hands buried in dishwater, and I let the silence be my answer. That silence turned into a siege. He began to make mistakes. Tiny flinches, bad judgments. One night in a drunk confidence he sent Lily a picture meant to be private. It landed instead in a group chat that included his boss. The office began to murmur. Efficiency numbers dipped. Rumors became a current and then a torrent. Hannah smiled. I smiled quieter. There are people who cure heartbreak with meetings, with therapy, with travel. I tried those things too. Slow runs at dawn, a journal that leaked my worst thoughts into the margins, but none of them was as clarifying as the planning. The truth is, action eases a particular kind of ache. There is a difference, subtle and dangerous, between healing and weaponizing pain. I blurred that line. I prepared the public reveal carefully. I could have stood up in a cafe and screamed. I could have published the screenshots to 1,000 faceless feeds and watched his world combust. Easy, savage, hollow. Instead I decided to dismantle him where he had built his life. At work. Ethan worked at a boutique architectural firm. He loved the fact that his designs were praised in small magazines, that his name appeared in footnotes. Reputation in that field is a currency more fragile than glass. I found a way to make his fragility visible. A week before the presentation that would have made him partner, I sent a carefully formatted email to the firm's mailing list. It came from an anonymous account and contained a link to a Dropbox folder. The folder held a document, annotated images that suggested plagiarism. Drawings that matched Ethan's current project but were, in older iterations, credited to a small design collective in Lisbon. The copy was brutal in its clarity. Date stamps, file metadata that had been left uncleaned, amateurs always, and a note that read like a knife. You decide how you bend the truth. The firm called a meeting. The partner leaned across the table and asked Ethan, "Explain." He stammered. His mouth made the shape of an explanation, but there was nothing in it. Colleagues who had once looked at him with admiration now looked like jurors. He was suspended pending inquiry. That day, when he came home, he found the apartment emptied. I had packed the essentials into a canvas bag and left a letter on the kitchen table. "I am not yours to forgive," it said. I don't usually write letters. I knew he would read it, and his eyes would look for the pleas that begging might offer him. There was no pleas. There was only the quiet mathematical finality of truth and consequence. He begged. He called at odd hours. He came to my doorstep. I opened the door, let him in for 5 minutes, long enough for him to search my face and call it pity, long enough for him to say, "I love you." It was the most interesting lie he'd ever told. I told him to leave. He left. The inquiry at his firm dragged on like a slow fever. They could not prove everything. Often the legal standard is slower than social ruin. But reputation is not only determined by verdicts. It is formed in the lingering glance, the half-pause before a compliment. Ethan's was dismantled. He took a leave and for a while, he stayed with his sister in the suburbs. I kept the apartment. The next stage was the psychological part. I wanted him to understand not just that he had been caught, but why he had been capable of betrayal, what it did to his self-concept. People who cheat often tell themselves they are still basically decent. I wanted to force him to see the interior he had so carefully denied. So I began to mirror him. Not in the petty way of sleeping with a friend or exposing him to the one-upmanship of revenge. I mirrored him by reflecting his behavior back at him, but turned cold and precise. When he phoned, I answered sometimes and sometimes I did not. When he appeared at the bakery, I sat with eyes made of ice as if I were a judge. I became a study in removed dignity. The worst punishment in such cases is not humiliation. It is indifference. But indifference only works when it is credible. I allowed myself to regret what we had been. I went on dates that were poorly chosen on purpose so that he would see them and think, Amanda is moving on, and then he would watch as I quietly left those dates halfway through. I wanted the mirror to be confusing, to make him think perhaps he had never really known me at all. Each small act was deliberate. I walked past the gym where he trained and let the trainer see me, smiling at my new deliberate composure. I began to take piano lessons. A laughable vanity for someone who had never cared for music, but it was an image. I signed up for a ceramics class and my wrists smelled of clay. Little by little, I reassembled myself into a person he might regret losing because regret is a corrosive, constant companion. I was not above cruelty. One night I drove the hour to the suburb where his sister lived and I sat in my car and watched him through a rain-streaked window as he argued with the TV, fingers stabbing the air. I could have walked in and demanded something from him. Confession, apology, a public spectacle. But instead I wrote a letter and slid it under his sister's door anonymously. In it I recounted small, intimate things about his life. Details only someone close could know. The letter was not accusatory. It was a careful summation of his days, the ways he made excuses. It read like a witness statement and left him waiting for the police. He called his sister in a panic. The panic was the point. Meanwhile, Lily disappeared from our lives. I orchestrated a series of anonymous emails to her workplace. Nothing illegal, just the right amount of suggestion. She was suspended pending HR investigation. When she reached out to Ethan through a mutual friend, he snapped, "Do not contact me." I heard about it through Hannah, who whispered the news with a sense of triumph I did not share. My war was not with Lily. Hers was collateral. My favorite weapon was the slow return of his mother's trust. Ethan's mother, Marion, had always admired me in a way that made me uncomfortable. She had an old-fashioned sense of family, and the idea of our pairing had given her small, steady pleasure. She called me one afternoon, tearful, because the office rumors had made their way back to her social group. "I don't know what to think," she said. I told her what she needed to hear, the truth but softened. I told her I needed time, and that the hardest thing was not proving his guilt but deciding whether I could forgive. I let her go believing I might forgive. She took to my side. Her opinion mattered to him in a way I had never suspected. The slow erosion worked. He staggered. He made overtures that felt like bargaining. Rare, clumsy, and transparent. "We can get through this," he said over coffee. He tried to pin his sins to youthful errors and loneliness, as if infidelity could be explained away by a shortage of affection. I told him, honestly, the thing about betrayal isn't only the act. It's the understanding that, given the chance, you chose something that was not me. He flinched. It's small to list it like that, but the unremarkable truth lodges in the ribs. Then he lashed out. One night, drunk and brittle with pride, he sent a message to my mother that was cruel and private. My mother, who had looked at him through the eyes of a woman who wanted her daughter to be happy, called me and cried. I sat on the floor of my bedroom and listened to her voice, soft and wounded, and I realized that my revenge had not been enough. The heart is a stubborn organ. It wants restitution as well as retribution. So I escalated, not into violence, but into exposure so total it felt like sunlight poured into the closets of his life. I had built the timeline, and in it I had left myself a string of breadcrumbs, pieces of evidence that told the story with ruthless clarity. I began to distribute them in places that would hurt him not physically but where it would matter. To his boss, to clients, to his mother's book club. I mailed a careful dossier to the small magazine that had once praised his designs. I included the metadata and the old Lisbon designs, the clear timestamp discrepancies, and a question. Is this how you want to build your brand? The article that followed was not explosive. It was exact. It said, in mild, polite language, that an architect under review for his portfolio had been the subject of investigation. It linked to a discussion forum where professionals debated ethics. Within weeks, contacts evaporated. Collaborations dissolved. His name was still his name, but the sheen was gone. What I did not expect was the collateral empathy that rose on his behalf. People do not like seeing someone fall. His sister asked me, through a thinly veiled text, whether I wanted to meet to talk. I declined. Empathy is a problem for any avenger. It is messy and inconvenient. But I could not allow him the solace of community at my expense. The turning point came the night he tried to make me believe it had all been an accident. He showed up on my doorstep with rain in his hair and papers in his pocket. He was thinner, pallid at the mouth. He said things like, "I never meant to hurt you," the phrase laced with practiced regret. He looked like a man who believed his tears could be a shield. I let him inside because I wanted him to see how ordinary I remained. My living room smelled of coffee and lemon. There was a small vase on the table with 3 daisies. Hannah had sent them with a note, "We all deserve sunlight." Ethan sat on the couch and watched me, and for the first time I noticed details I had missed. The lines around his eyes, the way he rubbed his thumb across his pants when he spoke. He had a new phone. It lay face down on the coffee table. Conversation is dangerous when both parties know the stakes. He tried to make confessions that were partial, collecting my pity in beads. "I'm sorry," he said. I thought. The confessions were designed to stop me before I could speak. I let him go on. Then I said something he didn't expect. "Show me your phone." His hands froze. I could see the calculation chain that runs inside someone who has built a life on small deceits. Show the phone and you risk exposure. Don't show it and you risk being a coward. He placed it face down as if that would make the content invisible. I tapped it lightly, turned it over, and unlocked it with the code he had told me in a moment of intimacy. 0527, our anniversary. He'd never changed it. I knew the little habits of the men we loved. They hide keys in our memories. The messages spilled out. Late-night apologies to Lily, a calendar marked with dates, a string of images that demonstrated a familiarity he would never have if it had been mere curiosity. He watched my face as if watching someone decode a map of him. When the last message flashed, he shut his mouth like a gate. "You lied," I said. "Yes," he said. "Why?" I asked. He tried to blame loneliness, a need for validation, the way men in his family had sought solace. His explanations were a fossilized kind of excuse. All the reasons for why people betray, none of the responsibilities. I asked him, "Do you think you deserve me?" He stared. He said, "No," he said. "Yes." He said, "I don't know." Then I did something I had not expected to find satisfying. I forgave him. Not because he deserved it but because it would prove to myself I could choose mercy. "I forgive you," I said, and the statement felt like a finishing move because I removed the weapon from my hand and set it on the table. "But I am not staying." He crumpled like paper. For a long time after, he called. He wrote letters pinned with quotes he thought I'd like. He tried to make me remember the small ordinary things. The time we got caught in rain and laughed, the nights we built forts out of blankets. I let him keep his memories. I did not take them from him. But I refused to hand him mine back. The victory, when it came, was not dramatic. It was quiet and merciless in its effectiveness. He moved out, taking the jazz records and a numb, hollow certainty that he had lost something beyond his moral reckoning. The firm let him go. Lily's life drifted back into its own orbit. Hannah and I had a drink once and she put her hand over mine and said with a sigh, "You did it." I thought, did I destroy a man to save myself? The question rolled in my mouth like an old coin. Winning had cost me things. I traded my trust for power, and that trade is both necessary and stingy. I slept differently. I woke quicker. I had to listen to the soundtrack of my own decisions, which sometimes hummed with triumph and sometimes with loneliness. I had become someone who could orchestrate ruin with a spreadsheet and a forgiving smile. People asked afterward why I had not chosen the dramatic revenge, the one that movies make beautiful. They want Arius and lightning. But the kind of victory I wanted had nothing to do with spectacle. I wanted him to recognize me, finally, not as a shape he could slide into whenever convenient, but as a person who would not be collateral. I wanted him to understand that betrayal changes the betrayer as much as it does the betrayed. He lost status, yes. But the deeper loss was the mirror he had to hold up to himself and the shame he would carry like an invisible scar. There were small kindnesses along the way that kept me human. I volunteered at a shelter on Tuesdays and learned the names of the dogs there. There was a woman, Alec, who taught me how to make sourdough without impatient hands. I dated, awkwardly, naturally, the way people do when they try on parts of themselves that feel unfamiliar. Sometimes I missed Ethan so sharply it felt like a physical injury. Other times I marveled at the freedom of decision. There is a kind of clarity that follows a betrayal. When the dust settles, you see the room differently. You rearrange the furniture of your life. Months later, I saw him at a gallery opening. He looked thinner. The lights caught the angles of his cheekbones. He pretended not to see me until Hannah, who'd come to the exhibit with me as a sort of arm's-length ally, whispered and nudged. He approached as if propelled by gravity. "Amanda," he said. He said my name like it was a thing he could resurrect with a ritual. He said, "You look," he paused, searching for the right adjective. "You look strong." I smiled in a way that was both warm and final. "I look like someone who learned to protect what's hers," I said. "That's all." He watched me as if I were an experiment, one that had yielded an unexpected result. His face did not crumple with hatred or rage. Instead, it softened with something like acceptance. If revenge had a moral ledger, perhaps that moment was where we both paid our debts. There's a quieter kind of victory than the world anticipates. Not the destruction of the other, but the rebuilding of the self. I kept the apartment. I painted the living room a color that was not his. I bought a plant and kept it alive through the winter, which felt like a miracle. I let myself love things again. Music that hummed under my skin, recomposed mornings that smelled like coffee and lemon. When friends asked if I was over it, I told them like an honest person, that it was less about getting over and more about receiving myself back. Sometimes at night, in the hush between the buzz of the oven downstairs and the city's low distant drone, I revisit the timeline. I pull the loose thread of who I was and I see how it unspooled and then rewove into someone else. There are moments I miss him, but missing is not submission. It is testimony to what was real, the warmth we once shared, the truth that not everything about a person is treachery. Love is a complicated, messy thing. Betrayal is the deliberate undoing of that complicated thing. If there is a lesson, it is not to craft vengeance as a final answer to infidelity. People who write manifestos about revenge often fail to account for the moral erosion that enters with every planned slight. I tried to keep a boundary. I built consequences and not chaos. I wanted to win fully, without losing my soul. Amanda is still me. I am still she who kept careful notes and then burned some of them, who practiced the piano and learned to cook, who let Hannah in for drinks and pushed her away when the old cunning jealousy flared. I am the woman who chose to be visible, paradoxically, by becoming invisible, by walking away when everyone expected I would stay. I won because in the end I reclaimed my narrative. I took back the story that had been easy for someone else to write. He learned someday, maybe too late, what it meant to have a life made of small, honorable things crumble. I suppose what terrifies people most about stories like this is the audacity of the one scorned who refuses to grovel. We are taught, in whispered proverbs and loud sermons, that victimhood should generate humility. What I learned is that sometimes you have to be unhumble. You have to stand up and say, "I will not be the backdrop for your self-discovery." You must be the architect of your own survival. In the months that followed, strangers complimented my composure and friends envied my strength. They asked me how I did it, as if there were a formula. There is no formula, only decisions and the capacity to follow them through. You must be honest with the dark places in yourself. You must be prepared for the human cost. You must accept that things scar. Once on a rainy night, I drove past the bakery and saw a young couple stealing a kiss beneath the awning. The smell of sugar rose, warm and nostalgic. For a moment a childlike, foolish hope flickered. Maybe love does not end in catastrophe. Maybe people remake themselves. Maybe Ethan would too. I did not want him to fail, only to be accountable. It is possible to want both. There are nights I dream of him, of the version of him that had not yet learned to lie, and I wake up with tears in my throat and a strange tenderness for someone who once built small forts with me out of blankets. In the morning, I make coffee and feed the plant, and the world is ordinary and exactly what I need it to be. Revenge is not the story's end. It is the bridge to the place where you become unrecognizable to the life you once had. I stood on that bridge and crossed, carrying nothing but the knowledge that I had reclaimed the authority to say what my life would look like next. I am Amanda, I am not your collateral, and I will not be the footnote in anyone's story again.